Brian with Fearless Filmmaking here, and today I want to revisit the Sony FX3. I've had this camera for about a year and have used it on such a variety of projects: corporate, commercial, weddings, short films, just about every kind of project that you could use and test a camera on, and I've had the opportunity to really put it through its paces. So I want to give my thoughts on this camera and if I think it's still worth it. Do I regret it? There's tons of videos about all the specs and all that crap, so I'm not even going to necessarily go into that. Here on this channel, I like to just be real and talk about the real, genuine experiences with these cameras. And honestly, after a year, it's still my favorite camera that I've ever used in terms of usability, functionality, everything. Probably the GH5 would come in second, just in terms of the usability and ergonomics, because that camera's in-body stabilization absolutely kicks ass. That is the only thing this camera does not do as well or better than the GH5. And that's really why, for me, this guy is still a fantastic camera. So what are the things that I like most about the FX3? Certainly the 10-bit 422 codecs are absolutely fantastic. I never ever shoot in 420 8-bit on the FX3. And that's because there's just so much more color information. It's so much easier to color correct, get a really pretty image. You can push and pull the image so much more. You can overexpose or underexpose more and be able to particularly overexpose more and be able to pull back, highlight detail. There's a point where you can't do that anymore. It's not magic, but there's certainly some highlights that I'm like, oh man, you are gone, that I've been able to recover so much better with the FX3 than I would have with, say, this A6400 or A6600 or any other 8-bit camera. The other thing that I absolutely love about this are all of the frame rate options as well. Now, I will be honest, I was so into 120 frames a second, and I use it occasionally, but most of the time, if I'm shooting slow-mo, it is 4K 60 instead of 4K 120. There are, specific scenarios where I might want 4K 120 if I'm doing something super fast that I want to slow down, be super epic, some speed ramps, something like that. Maybe some crazy fashion stuff. I really think the last time that I used it was on a fashion video 8 or 9 months ago at a pool. Shot a lot of super slow-mo. I generally didn't have the shots slowed down all the way and ended up, bringing them back up to what would have been roughly 60 frames a second anyway. So there's that. It's not as big a deal for most of us as you'd think. As any of you who've watched a lot of my other videos know, the top handle broke on this guy really early on. I have not replaced it. I'd planned to, but in a lot of the FX3 forums, other people's handles are just like breaking ridiculously. They're flimsy, and it wasn't worth it to me either to buy a new one or get it repaired and pay, $500-600. At some point I might buy the MK3 hot shoe that basically does the same thing as the FX3 handle, just without the handle part, but it'd also be compatible with, my A6600 and A7 III and any other Sony camera that I'd want to use, so it would have more versatility for me. But I haven't gone ahead and pulled the trigger on that yet, because I just used the Rode Wireless Go 2, and it works just fine with the 3.5mm jack, so I'm not really feeling like I'm missing out on anything. A feature that I like much more than I expected is the tally light. You can see it there on the front. If we flip the screen around, you can see that little red box. Flip this guy back around, and you can see this light here on the back. And that's fantastic because you can see at an instant that yes, you're recording. It's really hard to think you're recording and then realize, 5 minutes into, recording a wedding ceremony or something, that the camera is not running. Or, doing the classic, thinking it's recording, hits the button, records, hit it again to stop, and then you end up realizing you've just recorded the ground a whole bunch and have not gotten the shots that you need. That's huge for this guy. I wish that that was a feature implemented into like the A6600 that I'm shooting on right now. So I wouldn't have to, glance up at the screen that I've got, up there. Wouldn't have to glance up at that and see. And the A7 III, unless I have an external monitor, I've got no idea if it's recording or not, if I'm shooting myself. But FX3, for me, that is honestly between, if I was thinking about getting an A7S III or another FX3, that's the money feature for me. Why I would choose to get the FX3 again instead of an A7S III. Ergonomics and build. I personally really like the build, the feel. I love having the big red button on top. You can hit that, even that one lights up. Hit again, stop. You've also got the one on the front that you can hit, and that one does not light up, but then you've got the other tally light, and stop recording. Boom, fantastic. In terms of it operating a little bit different than Sony's other cameras, you've got the mode button instead of the mode dial. For me, this is just as fine because really the only two modes I use on this camera are the video mode and the S&Q mode, and it's not hard at all to switch between those. I have no, real need to have a mode dial to easily switch between stuff. I don't take stills with this camera, so not a problem for me. How do I feel about the cageless design? Well, you can see I've got a small rig plate on top that's just attached with a couple screws in the holes here, and for me, that really is the base of my whole rig, if you will. I'm not the kind of guy who likes to build up a ridiculous rig. If I was going to do that, I'd consider going back to a cinema camera, or just wouldn't have sold my FX9, because that, if I was, that kind of body, but I really like nice and small and easy to strip down and build up. So if I want to put it on a Steadicam or a gimbal or something like that, really easy. Attach the, if I'm going to build it up, I attach top handle, side handle, good to go. And I can strip it down in like less than 30 seconds and pop it on a Steadicam and be good to go. So for me, that versatility and having a small package is why I chose the FX3. So I really don't build it up. So having these extra mounting points is handy because I can just attach that small rig handle and be good to go without needing a cage and then to have to take on and off the cage and all that kind of stupid stuff that I had to do with my Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera, because that thing was ridiculous. In terms of the menus, it's, Sony's new menu that's in the A7S III, FX3, and A7 IV, and probably all of their mirrorless cameras going forward. And personally, I really like it. It's definitely better and easier than the old Sony menus. I've used the old Sony menus so much that it's not really that hard to find what I need on those menus. So it's not like I'm like, oh, this sucks, man. I just can't find anything. I'm used to both menus. I personally don't have a hard time switching back and forth between the menus either. So that's really worth noting, but definitely nice menu system in here. Infinitely better, in my opinion, than the FX9 or FX6 menus. It does have the full-size HDMI port. I use that occasionally if I want to mount my Atmos Shinobi on it, so that's great. I really prefer, obviously, the full-size HDMI because it's not as fragile. Another feature I like are the dual SD card slots. I pretty much almost always use those when I'm on any kind of major shoot. Rather it's fashion show, short film, wedding, commercial or corporate job, and I will always dual record because I'm paranoid. I'm a little paranoid SOB, so I don't want to risk any chance of losing the footage, and it has actually saved me on a recent shoot. It was a big fashion charity shoot. One of my SD cards was acting really weird. Slot A was acting weird. I think it's because I deleted a file in camera. Don't do that. And it just kept being like, card error, like when I'd be recording, and it was kind of freaking me out. So I don't know what was going on, but it was weird. But I got all the clips on my second SD card, and so nothing was lost, no harm was done. But if I'd only had the one SD card in, could have been a problem. And to know that you've got it on your backup card is really, really good. You know, in terms of image quality, love the image coming out of this camera. Obviously, it's the same as A7S III, but both of those, very, very beautiful image. I used to always use the Black Pro Mist. I have not as much recently, and I still really like the image out of this. It just really depends on the look that I'm going for, but particularly with like the Tamron Holy Trinity, the 17 to 28, 28 to 75, and 70 to 200. Really beautiful image. I use those lenses probably 90% of the time that I'm out on jobs. You know, as far as camera, I've been really happy with the image, both with and without the Pro Mist filters. It does have a really, really nice rendition and pop and clarity and crispness that I really enjoy. Now, if I compared it to the FX9 footage, the FX9 has a little bit of an edge, but if I'm not, you know, directly comparing the two, absolutely gorgeous image out of this camera. You know, what are my drawbacks to this camera? One is battery life compared to some other Sony cameras. This is a lot hungrier. This will eat through your batteries in, you know, maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours, depending on if you're turning it off or, you know, shooting constantly or just shooting occasional clips. Just kind of depends. But you can definitely, like, if you're watching the battery monitor, you can see it dropping much faster than you can on a 6600, for example, or A7 III, anything like that. So this is a hungry monster, partly because of the fan, partly because of the intense codecs. It's just a hungry little beast. That said, if you're used to Blackmagic, this camera blows that out of the water. This is nothing near as bad as a Blackmagic camera's battery life. So don't even panic, don't even sweat it. It's just, I carry generally 4 batteries if I'm gonna be having a long shoot day, just so that I'm sure I'm protected and don't have to be sweating if my last battery is gonna hold or not. The other issue I touched on, the in-body image stabilization in this camera, it's better than like the A7 III or A6600 or something like that, but it's not anything to write home about. You know, if you're hand holding and not using really great technique, you're gonna see jitters and shakes, and you know, sometimes I do handheld, but it's very much the handheld look. It's not like the GH5 where you could handhold and it almost looked like you were on a tripod, or if you walked carefully, almost get away with, you know, it being like a gimbal or something like that. That is not the FX3, absolutely not. So don't even put that in your head. I generally will keep this guy on a monopod or a tripod or a Steadicam or some form of stabilization, unless I need really quick, like low to the ground shots where I can be really, really stable. But otherwise I'm keeping it pretty much on some kind of stabilizer, or at least with like the handles, so that I've got a little bit more stabilization with it. Other than that, I could get into some nitpicky things, which mainly has to do with it being in the quote cinema line. It does not have DCI 4K, really not that big of a deal, not that much more width, but if somebody requires it, this guy can't do it, so I'd have to rent a camera out. Additionally, it does not have waveforms, false color, anything like that. Again, not a huge deal. If I need those features, I can plug in the Atmos Shinobi and be rocking those features. But if I want to keep it small, if it's going to be on a Steadicam, it's not having any of that. So that's something to keep in mind. If you need those features, you might look at a different camera. But again, most of those other cameras like the FX6, or if you're going Canon, the C70, are much bigger and not really Steadicam friendly like this guy. If I had one more like nitpicky complaint, it would probably be the weight compared to something like the A6600. I understand why it has to be heavier, but you know, I wish, you know, maybe it could be a little smaller and lighter for Steadicam, but that's really ridiculous nitpicking. Like, it's a light camera compared to FX9, FX6, all the big boys. Pretty standard for that kind of DSLR size form factor, A7S III, stuff like that, gonna be pretty similar in size and weight. So after a year of using the FX3, do I still recommend it? Abso-frickin-lutely. This probably is my favorite camera that I've ever owned. And again, a reminder that includes GH3, GH5, A7 III, A6600, Blackmagic Pocket 4K, and FX9. So big range of cameras, a lot of cool cameras. But the FX3 has the power of the FX9, even more power than the FX9, in a form factor similar to the GH5, and you know, a lot of just the beautiful image that you get out of something like a pocket camera. But you know, it just all kind of fits into this one package, and I really enjoy it. Hope that you guys enjoyed this video. Consider subscribing if you did. Hit that like button and check out this video right now.